October 9th, 1986, started like any other Thursday in Rochester, New Hampshire. Ruth Parker left for work that morning, not knowing that everything in her world was about to vanish, quietly, completely, and forever. She got the call just after 5 p.m. It was her ex-husband, Charles Vossler. His voice was calm, not rushed, not panicked. "I've taken the boys," he said. "We're not coming back." That was it. No argument. No room for negotiation. Just a door slammed shut on her life. By nightfall, her sons, 3-year-old CJ and 2-year-old Billy, were gone. And so was Charles. His real estate office was cleaned out. The family photo albums had vanished. The joint bank accounts were empty. Even the payments on Ruth's car had stopped. He'd been planning this. Every single step. At first, Ruth didn't panic. It wasn't the first time Charles had taken the boys for a visit. He told her he was driving them down to see his sister in Connecticut. He promised to bring them back by Saturday. But Saturday came and went. And when she called, the number was disconnected. Then came the worst discovery. Charles hadn't just disappeared. He'd erased their life. Gone were the kids' clothes from his house, their toys, medical records, birth certificates, anything that could connect them to who they really were. He even destroyed every photograph Ruth had of her sons, except for one grainy 15-second video clip, buried in an old VHS tape from a company picnic. I've covered abductions. I've seen what trauma does to parents. But this was different. This wasn't a frantic snatch and run. This wasn't a moment of madness. This was cold, calculated, and patient. It was a man who spent months, maybe years, creating the perfect exit plan. And then he pulled the trigger. By the time law enforcement got involved, Charles had at least a week's head start. He'd closed his business, forwarded no mail, left no forwarding address. No witnesses saw him pack. He likely had help, someone who provided him with IDs, maybe even a new name. CJ and Billy weren't missing. They were hidden, and the world forgot them. There was no Amber Alert system back then, no viral Facebook shares, no nationwide coverage. Just a devastated mother, standing alone, handing out flyers made from a still frame of her sons laughing in a backyard, half-blurred and barely recognizable. Decades have passed. The world has changed. But the case of CJ and Billy Vossler, 2 little boys who were supposed to come home that weekend, remains one of the most haunting family abductions in American history. And the deeper I went into their story, the more I realized this wasn't just about a father on the run. It was about control, about reinvention, about a man who didn't just want to escape custody. He wanted to rewrite reality. To understand how we got here, how 2 toddlers vanished into a different life, I had to go back to the beginning, to the ad in Mother Earth News, to the promises of a simple life, to the man Ruth thought she was marrying. To understand how Charles Vossler pulled off one of the most complete disappearances I've ever seen, you have to understand who he was before October 1986 and how he operated. Ruth met him through a personal ad in Mother Earth News. He wrote about his dream of a quiet, self-sufficient life. No big city noise, no corporate chaos. Just land, family, and peace. Ruth was in her early 20s, looking for something different, something meaningful. And Charles seemed perfect. He was smart, soft-spoken, a man who read a lot, talked about solar power, composting, and building a life outside the system. They exchanged letters, then phone calls, and soon she packed her things and moved across the country to New Hampshire to start a life with him. They married in 1981. At first, everything looked ideal. He started a real estate business. They bought property. Ruth gave birth to 2 boys, CJ and Billy, just a year and a half apart. The family appeared picture perfect. But something about Charles began to shift after Billy was born. He became controlling, not in explosive ways, but in quiet, calculated ones. He didn't yell. He didn't hit. But he made decisions without Ruth. Major ones. Like the time he bought a rundown house without her consent, insisting they move in. Ruth refused. The place was unsafe for toddlers. So Charles allowed her to move into a separate apartment with the boys. He stayed in the house alone. That detail struck me. Not just because it showed his coldness, but because it gave him space. A base of operations. Somewhere to plan without being watched. By the summer of 1986, things got even stranger. Charles suddenly filed for divorce. No big fight. No explanation. He didn't push for custody, didn't even argue about visitation. He just signed the papers and drifted further away, emotionally and physically. Ruth thought he was shutting down, giving up, but he wasn't. He was setting up his exit. Behind the scenes, Charles was quietly dismantling his old life. He started funneling money out of their accounts. He shut down parts of his business. He told clients he was changing locations. He even called Ruth's car dealership and canceled her financing. He took the boys for weekend visits, more frequently than usual. And he started taking longer routes, unannounced trips, even stopping at rural motels. Looking back, Ruth believes he was testing the road. Practicing. He began removing pictures from frames. Organizing, he said. He wasn't organizing. He was deleting evidence. One by one, the things that proved CJ and Billy's identity were disappearing. Photos, birth records, social security documents. He was building a reality where those two little boys didn't exist. And Ruth didn't see it coming. Because Charles wasn't reckless. He wasn't impulsive. He was a methodical builder. Someone who treated escape like a real estate deal. A series of steps, prepared in advance, designed to leave no trace. I talked to investigators who looked at this case years later. One of them told me, "We don't think he snapped. We think he believed he was doing what was right. He wanted a world he could control. A world where no one could tell him how to raise his kids." And that's exactly what he built. What Charles Vossler did in the fall of 1986 wasn't just abduction. It was a total reboot. And the world wouldn't hear another whisper of him, or the boys, for 3 years. Until a woman in Oklahoma saw a poster and realized the man she'd been dating wasn't who he claimed to be. Imagine losing your children and then realizing you don't even have a photograph to show the world who they were. That was Ruth Parker's reality in the fall of 1986. When she reported CJ and Billy missing, she assumed the police would act fast. She assumed they'd issue a bulletin, get his license plate, flag his bank accounts. But the reaction was slow, lukewarm. "It's their father," one officer said. "They're probably just out of town." Ruth knew better. She'd seen the signs. But what she didn't realize, until too late, was how deeply Charles had scrubbed the past. He'd taken everything. Every baby photo. Every birthday snapshot. School forms, doctor visits, even the boys' immunization records. It was like he'd vacuumed their existence out of her home. And that left Ruth with nothing. No digital files. No iPhones. This was 1986. If you didn't have the negatives, you didn't have a second copy. And Charles had those, too. So she did the only thing she could. She searched. She visited old friends, neighbors, clients, anyone who might have a picture of her sons. She dug through storage boxes, closets, even trash bins. Weeks passed, then months. And finally, by pure chance, she hit a miracle. A coworker from her old office remembered bringing a camcorder to the company picnic that summer. Ruth begged him to find the tape. When he did, it was a dusty, unlabeled VHS. No one had watched it since. She popped it into a player, and there, in the background of one wide panning shot, were CJ and Billy. Just 15 seconds. CJ running in circles, Billy clutching a juice box, both of them laughing. Grainy, slightly out of focus, but it was enough. From that tape, the FBI pulled still images. They enhanced them, printed them, and used them to create missing persons posters. These were the only confirmed images of the boys after the abduction, the only link between their past and whatever future they'd been dragged into. But posters alone weren't going to find them. Ruth started appearing on local news. She mailed flyers to truck stops. She joined national missing children's networks, which, at the time, were still in their infancy. Every tip mattered. Every phone call jolted her heart. Most led nowhere. Worse, the case was aging. Quickly. In the media, time is a killer. A story like this, 2 young boys abducted by their father, might get a headline for a week. Maybe 2. But then a new story comes along. A bigger crime. A fresher tragedy. And Ruth's story faded. But she didn't. She kept going. For years. On her own dime. Living in cheap apartments. Working odd jobs. Spending weekends chasing cold leads from strangers who thought they saw something. What always struck me about Ruth wasn't her desperation. It was her precision. She kept records. Timelines. Clippings. She became her own investigator. Her own analyst. Her own media team. Because no one else was going to do it for her. And then, in 1989, 3 years after the boys vanished, the phone rang again. This time, it wasn't a dead end. This time, someone said, "I think I know where your kids are." In 1989, 3 years after CJ and Billy vanished, Ruth Parker got a call from Oklahoma that changed everything. A woman had seen the missing posters, the ones pulled from that grainy VHS tape, and something about the boys' faces triggered her memory. She'd been dating a man in the town of Stillwell. He called himself Charlie Wilson. He was quiet, guarded, a little strange. But it was the boys, the ones he said were his sons, that made her uneasy. They never played with other kids. They didn't go to school. They were homeschooled, kept mostly indoors, rarely seen around town. And when they did appear in public, they didn't speak much, like they were afraid to. The woman didn't think much of it at first. But when she saw the poster, something clicked. The names were different, but the faces. So she called the number. Federal agents moved fast. By the time they hit the address she gave them, a modest house just outside town, the place was already empty. No furniture, no toys, nothing. But that wasn't the strangest part. The house had burned. Not a total loss, but enough damage to make recovery of evidence nearly impossible. The local fire department was called, but the cause was undetermined. And the people who lived there? Gone without a trace. It wasn't a coincidence. I've talked to former FBI agents who reviewed the case, and they're convinced of one thing. Charles torched the house on purpose. Whether it was to destroy fingerprints, records, or simply buy himself time, it worked. The fire erased what little trail there was. And just like that, CJ and Billy were gone again. That sighting in Stillwell is one of the only confirmed leads post-disappearance. And it raises a chilling possibility. For a brief moment, the boys were close enough to be saved. They were alive, in a known place. And if agents had arrived a day earlier, maybe even a few hours, the outcome could have been different. But that's how this story works. It's a constant war against time, and Charles always seemed one step ahead. There are theories about how he pulled it off. Some believe he had inside help. Someone who provided fake documents, new identities, new license plates. Others think he'd been preparing alternate aliases for years. Charlie Wilson may have been just one of several. But here's what we do know. From 1986 to 1989, he managed to keep 2 toddlers hidden from the federal government, their own family, and the public, without raising a single red flag. And even more haunting, the kids never called for help. Because by then, they probably didn't know they needed it. They were still so young when they disappeared. Just 2 and 3 years old. By the time of the Stillwell sighting, they were around 5 and 6. Old enough to speak, to ask questions, but young enough that if Charles told them a new name, a new birthday, a new truth, they would believe him. That's what makes this case so uniquely tragic. CJ and Billy weren't just taken. They were rewritten. Their memories, their language, their identity, slowly overwritten by a father who didn't just want to disappear. He wanted a clean slate. And for decades, no one has been able to crack that slate open. No confirmed sightings since Stillwell. No recovered records. Just shadows. And a mother still waiting. What happens to a child who grows up with a false name, in a false world, believing a lie so deeply it becomes the truth? That's the question that's haunted me since I first heard about CJ and Billy Vossler. By now, CJ would be 42 years old. Billy 40. If they're alive, and the evidence suggests they are, then they've lived full lives. They've gone to school, gotten jobs, maybe married. They might have children of their own. And they've done it all without knowing who they really are. Or maybe they do know. Maybe, somewhere deep down, they've always felt something wasn't right. This is where the case crosses from crime into tragedy. Because Charles didn't just abduct his sons, he stole their very selves. Their history, their family, their roots. Everything that connects a person to the question, who am I? He gave them new names, new birthdays, new versions of events. And over time, those versions became reality. FBI investigators believe Charles used multiple aliases, possibly even fake paperwork to enroll the boys in school or pass them off as homeschooled. With no digital records in the 80s and limited coordination between states, it wouldn't have been difficult, especially if he stayed mobile, moving every few years, changing names with each new town. There are reports, dozens of them, of men who might be CJ or Billy. Tips from coworkers, neighbors, even ex-wives of men who acted strangely protective or had no past. But DNA comparisons have never matched, and most of those tips fade into nothing. Still, one thing is almost certain. The boys grew up believing Charles was their only parent, that their mother had abandoned them, that the world outside their small orbit couldn't be trusted. That's how parental abductors work, not just by hiding the child, but by poisoning the truth. And after years, even the lie becomes comforting. In one of my conversations with Ruth, she told me something that stuck with me. I don't know if they're angry with me. I don't know if they remember me at all. But I have to believe that somewhere, a part of them still knows. It's not just sentiment. There's science behind it. Studies on long-term abduction cases show that even when children are taken young, fragments of early memories, voices, smells, songs, can linger into adulthood, buried beneath layers of false narrative. It's possible CJ still has flashes of that backyard in Rochester. It's possible Billy hears a name like Ruth and doesn't know why it tugs at something inside him. But will that ever be enough to bring them back? That's the painful mystery at the center of this story. Because by now, the only people who could truly crack this case might be CJ and Billy themselves. Not the FBI, not law enforcement, not even Ruth. It might come down to a moment, a strange feeling, a haunting dream, a face in the mirror that doesn't match the story they were told. A moment that makes one of them ask, who was I before him? But for now, that moment hasn't come. And Charles Vossler, their father, their captor, remains at large. Somewhere out there, a man in his 80s may still be holding on to the final version of his lie. And unless someone breaks the silence, he'll take it to his grave. Every time I look at the FBI's most wanted poster for Charles Martin Vossler, one detail catches me off guard. His smile. It's not sinister, not forced. It's warm, disarming. The kind of smile you'd expect from a man showing you a house. Not the man who stole 2 children and vanished for nearly 4 decades. But that's what makes him dangerous. Charles wasn't a monster in the closet. He was the charming guy in the next pew. The helpful neighbor. The real estate agent you'd trust with your home. That's how he did it. That's how he disappeared. Today, he'd be 82 years old. Still wanted by the FBI. Still carrying the weight of a lie that's grown heavier with every passing year. In 2006, authorities released age-progressed photos of what CJ and Billy might look like. It made headlines. Then, silence. In 2019, another image. Another update. Another cycle of hope that led nowhere. Ruth still checks those posters. She still waits for tips. Every time a man in his 40s takes a DNA test, every time someone shares a memory of a childhood that doesn't quite add up, she's watching. She's learned to live in that space between grief and hope. Because what else is there? Her boys were taken at an age when memories were still forming, when the mind is soft clay, easily reshaped. They may believe Charles died years ago, or that he was the hero who saved them from a mother who didn't want them. Whatever story they've been told, it's all they've ever had. But the truth is still waiting. And here's the thing I can't let go of. He's still out there. Maybe hiding in plain sight. Maybe in some remote cabin, using yet another name. Or maybe he's not hiding at all. Just living, quietly, anonymously, the way he always wanted. That's what makes this case so chilling. Not just that a father could steal his children and disappear, but that he could get away with it. No arrests. No sightings since 1989. No closure. Just 2 names on a poster, and a mother still calling into the dark. This isn't just a cold case. It's a question that refuses to die. Where are CJ and Billy Vossler? And if they're out there, if they're listening, I want them to hear this. You were taken. You were loved. And you were never forgotten. Your mother never stopped searching. Your names are still spoken. And your story still matters.